My name is Clara, and I'm 30 years old. If you asked whether I once had big dreams, I'd say absolutely yes. I wanted to be a singer, the kind who could step onto a stage and make every heart stop just to listen. But life had other plans. After college, I found myself working as a loan officer at a small bank in Asheville, North Carolina. It wasn't what I'd dreamed of, but it paid the bills and helped clear my student loans. I met Ethan at a college reunion one summer. He was a friend of one of my old classmates, and we ended up being partners in a silly celebrity guessing game. He had that effortless smile, the kind that makes you want to keep talking. He also understood something few people did, what it meant to let go of a dream. Ethan had been a dancer in college, passionate and talented, but like me, he'd chosen practicality over passion. His family wanted him in business, not on stage. Maybe that's why we clicked so quickly. We started dating just weeks later. My mom, ever the romantic, kept asking when she'd finally get to hold her first grandchild. I wasn't sure I was ready for marriage, but Ethan made everything feel easy. He was thoughtful planning picnics, bringing small gifts like a new set of headphones because he knew I still hummed while cleaning. A year later, we got married. I left my job at the bank to focus on our home and future. Ethan worked at a financial consulting company in Greensboro and earned enough for both of us. He said I deserved to rest after all those long years of working, but after the wedding, I began to learn more about his family. Ethan had a younger sister named Iris, just 2 years younger than us. They said she had suffered nerve damage from a severe fever when she was 8, leaving her unable to walk or speak ever since. At first, I thought it was heartbreaking. A young woman bound to a wheelchair, living in quiet stillness for the rest of her life. But Iris wasn't the picture of sadness I had imagined. Despite her silence, she had a beautiful way of expressing herself through soft gestures, quick sketches, and that little letterboard she always carried. In the beginning, I didn't know how to communicate with her, but slowly, I began to understand her unspoken language. It was in the tilt of her head, the spark in her eyes, the warmth of her smile. I'll never forget one golden afternoon on the back porch. I traced a musical note in the air and pointed to the sky, teasing her about my old dream of becoming a singer. Iris grinned and drew a heart on her notepad. I laughed, signing to her, "You understand me." She nodded, her eyes glowing like she'd just told me a secret she'd been holding for years. If Iris was a quiet light, then my mother-in-law, Marjorie, was the shadow that often followed it. She had a way of looking at me sharp, assessing, like I was an item she could still return for store credit. Every visit to her house felt like a test. "Don't leave Ethan's shoes there," she'd say with that pointed tone. "He looks lazy when you do that." And if he looks lazy, what does that say about his wife? I'd smile tightly and place the shoes neatly in the closet, even though part of me wanted to leave them exactly where they were. Everything in Marjorie's house had its place: towels folded left to right, clothes hung by color, dishes arranged as if waiting for a magazine photo shoot. I wasn't unfamiliar with order, but the way she enforced it always made me feel small. To her, Ethan was still her precious little boy, and I, no matter how polite or patient, was always the outsider who'd taken him away. Our apartment was just 20 minutes from their home, but that distance never stopped Marjorie. Somehow, she always knew when I was alone. She'd drop by unannounced, grocery bags in one hand and advice, in the other how to clean, how to cook, how to be a better wife. I used to believe marriage meant peace, a space of our own where love lived quietly. But over time, I realized I'd joined a family ruled by invisible rules, where every word was measured, and every act of kindness felt like an obligation. Still, what I never could have predicted was that Iris, the one the world called helpless, would soon be the one to change my life completely. And even now, I can't say when exactly things began to shift. Maybe it started a few months after our first anniversary. Ethan stopped smiling when I handed him his morning coffee. He no longer sent those small, thoughtful messages asking if I'd eaten lunch or how my day was going. The gestures that once made me feel cherished began to fade, one by one. He started coming home later, always with the same excuses: late meetings, urgent reports, demanding clients. I wanted to believe him, so I'd eat dinner alone, watching the food grow cold while trying to convince myself he was just tired from work. But over time, the distance between us became impossible to ignore. When I tried to ask what was wrong, he brushed it off. When I stayed quiet, he didn't seem to notice. The silence between us grew heavier than any argument could have been. Ironically, as Ethan drifted further away, I found myself growing closer to Iris. I began visiting her more often. At first, Marjorie wasn't happy about it. She made that clear, but I didn't care. Every time I arrived, Iris would already be waiting by the window, her sketchpad in her lap, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. She drew the most beautiful things: tiny cottages tucked between trees, cats with silly hats, kites tangled in the clouds. Her art was full of joy and imagination, like a world she had built to live in freely when her body couldn't. I realized then that Iris wasn't broken. She was brilliant and far more aware than anyone gave her credit for. At night, after Ethan had gone to bed or buried himself in his laptop, I started teaching myself sign language. At first, I only managed the basics: hello, thank you, how are you? But soon, the gestures became sentences, and sentences became conversations. It wasn't just a new skill, it was a lifeline, a secret way to connect with someone who actually saw me. When Iris and I spoke with our hands, it felt like we stepped out of that cold, controlled world, the one where Marjorie's voice still rang in my ears, sharp and judging. One evening, after I had helped Iris tidy her room, Marjorie cornered me near the doorway. "I don't understand why Ethan chose someone like you," she said flatly. "Iris may adore you, but that doesn't mean I do." I didn't reply, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew silence was my only real defense. Every word from her felt like an attempt to reshape me into someone more obedient, more grateful, more like her. But I wasn't her, and I was starting to realize I didn't want to be. And then there was Ethan. He never defended me, never disagreed with his mother. Whenever I mentioned one of Marjorie's sharp remarks, he'd shrug it off. "That's just how Mom is," he'd say. "You'll get used to it." After a while, I stopped bringing it up, and he stopped pretending to care. It was early autumn when everything began to shift again. The air cooler, the leaves turning soft shades of gold. I decided to visit Ethan's parents' house that evening, carrying a tray of homemade pumpkin bars. They were Iris's favorite, and I wanted to surprise her. But when I walked in, the warmth I'd hoped for wasn't there. Ethan was sitting in the living room beside Marjorie. They were laughing, genuinely laughing, something I hadn't seen him do around me in months. "Oh, you're here tonight," Ethan said, his tone more startled than pleased. "I made these for Iris," I replied quietly, setting the tray on the table. "You didn't mention you'd be coming," he said, still sounding distant. "There's no need to mention it," Marjorie interrupted smoothly, her eyes fixed on me. "Family can come by any time." Her words sounded warm, but I knew exactly what she meant. "And you're not really family." I walked past them to where Iris sat by the window. This time, she didn't have her sketchpad. She just sat there, holding a soft blue pillow close to her chest. When she looked up at me, her eyes asked a question without words. "Are you all right?" I forced a smile and signed back, "I'm fine." But I wasn't. My hands trembled slightly, and I could feel that familiar ache in my throat, the one that comes when you're holding back tears. That night when we returned home, Ethan barely spoke. The silence filled the space between us like fog. I hung my coat on the hook and turned to face him. "Ethan," I asked softly, "is there something you're not telling me?" He looked startled, like I'd caught him mid-thought. "What kind of question is that?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just feel like you're not really here anymore. Not completely." He sighed and looked down at the floor. After a pause, he said, "It's just work, Clara. Don't overthink it." There it was again, those 3 words that always shut the door. Don't overthink it. So I didn't, at least not out loud, but deep down I knew. My instincts weren't wrong. Something had already changed, and it was only a matter of time before I found out what. Something was shifting in that family, something I couldn't quite name, but I could feel it everywhere. Once I had been the woman Ethan looked at like I was his whole world. Now I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. The only warmth left came from Iris. She was my one constant light. What I didn't know then was that her light would soon expose the darkness that had been living in that house far longer than I had. About 3 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday morning, I was making breakfast when Ethan walked into the kitchen. His shoulders were tense, his face unreadable. He placed his phone on the table and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Clara," he began carefully, "do you have any plans for next week?" It was such an unusual question coming from him that I stopped whisking the eggs. He hadn't asked about my plans in months. "Not really," I said slowly. "Why?" He took a breath, avoiding my eyes. "My family decided to take a trip to Hawaii, Mom, Dad, and me too." For a brief second, my heart lifted. Hawaii, the place we'd once promised to visit together for our anniversary, the one trip we used to daydream about. But as soon as I saw the stiffness in his face, that flicker of hope died. I knew what was coming before he even said it. "So, what about me?" I asked quietly, trying to sound calm even as a familiar ache started to build in my chest. Ethan looked down at the table, his fingers tracing the wood grain. "Clara, this time it's just a family trip." The words hit harder than I expected. A family trip, and I wasn't part of that definition. He hesitated again, then said, "Actually, there's something important I need to ask you." My heart sank. "What is it?" he exhaled, finally looking up. "My parents were wondering if you could stay home and take care of Iris while we're gone." For a moment, I couldn't even respond. His words hung in the air like an insult dressed as a favor. "Take care of Iris," I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. "Why not bring her along?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, already defensive. "Mom thinks it'll be too difficult for Iris to travel that far. And well, you're the one Iris feels most comfortable with. You're close to her, right?" He said it softly, but the manipulation was clear. He knew I wouldn't say no, not with his mother involved. And right then the doorbell rang. Ethan walked quickly to answer it, as if he'd been expecting it. Moments later, Marjorie stepped into the kitchen, dressed in her usual perfectly pressed blouse, her expression as firm as ever. "I believe Ethan already explained everything to you, Clara," she said, her eyes sharp and assessing. I stood there, frozen between them, the air thick with pressure. Ethan said nothing, just stared at the floor. "Do you have any objections?" she asked, her tone calm but challenging, as if daring me to defy her. A part of me wanted to scream, to tell her how deeply this all cut, but I couldn't. Instead, I forced a polite smile and said softly, "No, of course not. I'd be happy to take care of Iris." Marjorie's lips curved in faint satisfaction, and for the first time that morning, I felt the weight of something much heavier than disappointment. I felt trapped. "Good," Marjorie said briskly, her lips curling in faint approval. Now we can enjoy our vacation knowing Iris will be well taken care of. Ethan turned away, pretending to check his phone. He couldn't even look at me. After his mother stepped outside to wait in the car, he finally walked closer, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry, Clara," he murmured. "I didn't mean to put you in a difficult position, but everything's already been arranged." I looked up at him, keeping my face calm, even though I could feel the sting rising behind my eyes. "So," I said softly, "you made the decision before even asking me, didn't you?" He hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "I didn't have a choice." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the middle of our quiet kitchen, surrounded by the smell of burnt toast and the sound of nothing at all. I had done everything I could to please his family. Every gesture, every compromise, every smile that wasn't real anymore. And this was my reward. Decisions made behind my back, feelings brushed aside like crumbs on a counter. Yet a strange thought came over me then. At least for the next few days, I wouldn't have to endure Marjorie's sharp eyes or her constant judgment. That afternoon, I drove to their house to see Iris. She was sitting by the window as always, sunlight catching in her dark hair. When she saw me, her whole face lit up. I sat beside her, smiled, and signed gently. "I'm going to stay here with you for a few days, okay?" She blinked in surprise, then signed back, "They left you behind again." Her choice of words hit me like a chill. Left behind, it was the first time she had ever used that phrase. I hesitated, then nodded, deciding not to hide it anymore. "Yes," I signed. "They went to Hawaii." Iris watched me for a moment, her gaze steady, unreadable. Then she signed something that made my breath catch. "We have plans too. They'll be surprised." For a moment, I just stared at her, unsure what to think. Her eyes sparkled with something new, something almost secretive. And that's when I realized Iris might know far more than anyone had ever imagined. Maybe even more than I was ready to learn. Being left behind suddenly didn't feel like a punishment anymore. It felt like an opening, a door quietly swinging wide, leading somewhere I hadn't seen before. The next morning, I drew open the living room curtains at my in-laws' house. Warm spring light spilled through the windows, filling the room with a calm stillness. The house was unusually quiet, too quiet, and in that silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth I'd been avoiding was already beginning to unfold. That morning, Ethan's family had already left for the airport. The house felt lighter without them. No more Marjorie's constant criticism. No disapproving looks over how I folded the towels or swept the floor wrong. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. I made myself a cup of coffee, the vanilla blend Iris liked, and walked quietly toward her room. She was lying on her side, looking out the window at the lavender bush her mother had planted last spring. The morning sun poured in, soft and golden. I knocked gently. "I brought coffee," I said with a small smile. "The kind you like." Iris turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable, and then everything I knew about my life shattered in one impossible moment. She pushed herself upright, not awkwardly, not struggling. She simply sat up. For a second, I couldn't move. The sound in the room seemed to disappear, like the world itself had gone silent. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. "Iris, what are you doing?" I stammered, barely able to form the words. She let out a soft, almost amused laugh, and then spoke. Her voice gentle, calm, steady. "Relax, Clara," she said. "Don't freak out." I nearly dropped the coffee cup. You can talk," I gasped. "You can walk." She stood up slowly, deliberately, and took a few steps toward me. No tremor, no limp, no hesitation. Then she said quietly, "I never lost the ability to walk or talk. It was all an act, one I had to keep up for years to protect myself." My knees felt weak. I could barely breathe. What are you talking about? I whispered. Protect yourself from what? Iris sat down in the chair near the window and gestured for me to sit too. Her expression had changed, serious now, almost relieved. I'm not exactly who you think I am, she began. Ethan's my half-brother. His father had me with his first wife. After my father died, Marjorie, his second wife, got everything. The house, the business, the control, but she never wanted me around. I was a reminder of a life she wanted to erase. She looked down for a moment, then continued quietly. When I got sick with a fever at 10, she didn't take me to the hospital. She told the neighbors I'd suffered brain damage, that I couldn't walk or talk anymore. People believed her, and I didn't correct them. I stared at her, the realization hitting me like a wave. You pretended all these years, not forever, she said, just long enough to understand that the weaker I appeared, the less attention I got, and the less attention I got, the more freedom I had. Then she smiled a small, sad smile. Though you never treated me like I was broken, you saw me, not as a burden, not as someone to pity. I sat there, speechless. All those moments, her quiet smiles when Marjorie scolded me, the glances she gave when Ethan brushed me off, they all began to make sense. She had been watching, listening, waiting, but why now? I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why tell me this now? I asked quietly, still trying to process everything I'd just heard. Iris stood up, walked to the closet, and pulled out a small silver suitcase I'd never noticed before. Her movements were calm, deliberate, because, she said, turning to me with a spark in her eyes, we're going on a trip. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. A trip, you mean? She smiled. You didn't really think I'd just sit here while they enjoyed Hawaii, did you? My mouth fell open. You're going to Hawaii. We're going to Hawaii. She corrected, her tone firm but light. Plane tickets, hotel, everything's already arranged. And yes, Clara, you have a ticket too. I just stood there, speechless. She zipped up the suitcase and looked at me, her expression shifting from playful to serious. Dad left me money before he passed. I've been saving it for the right moment. I shook my head, still struggling to believe what I was hearing. Then Iris stepped closer, her voice low but steady. You need to see who Ethan and Marjorie really are. You've lived under their version of reality for too long. You deserve the truth, and Hawaii is where everything changes. When I met her eyes, there was nothing timid about her anymore. Gone was the quiet, fragile girl in the wheelchair. Standing in front of me was a woman who had been waiting years for this exact moment. I took a deep breath, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. A strange sense of purpose. For once, I wasn't being chosen to serve or to please. I was being chosen to fight. I smiled faintly. If you're ready, I said, then so am I. Iris's lips curved into a confident smile. Then let's go. And just like that, it began not a vacation, but a journey toward the truth buried under years of silence and deception. The next morning, the plane lifted off just after sunrise. I sat beside Iris in the economy cabin, still half in disbelief. Just yesterday, I'd quietly accepted being left behind. Now I was flying to Hawaii beside the sister, in-law everyone thought couldn't even walk. Iris looked effortless, white blouse, simple jeans, her hair tied neatly, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Every so often, she'd glance at me and flash a small, knowing smile, like we were in on a secret no one else could see. When the flight attendant handed us drinks, she tilted her head toward me. You look shocked, she said, sipping her orange juice. Not shocked, I murmured, staring out the window. I never thought things could change this fast. Sometimes, she said softly, it takes a shock to wake you up from a bad dream. I didn't answer, but she was right. For years, I'd been sleepwalking through my own life, believing in love, in loyalty, in a family that had never truly accepted me. 6 hours later, we landed in Honolulu. The sunlight was blinding, the ocean impossibly blue, the air warm and alive. Iris hailed a taxi she'd pre-booked, and we drove along the coast toward a beachfront resort in Waikiki. When we checked in, everything was already paid for under her name. She handed me a room key and subtly signed for me to stay quiet, aware of the staff nearby. Once we reached our room, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Iris, where did you get the money for all this?" She removed her sunglasses and smiled that same calm, mysterious smile. "Dad left it for me. I just waited for the moment it would matter most. But the flights, the hotel, this must have cost a fortune." She shrugged lightly. "Dad always told me to live for myself someday. I think this is that day." I turned toward the window, watching the waves shimmer in the fading light. "So, when do we see them?" Iris took out her phone, opened a restaurant reservation app, and handed it to me. "Tonight, 7 o'clock, poolside restaurant. Marjorie booked their table for 6. I looked at her, my pulse quickening. "And you're sure they don't know we're here?" "Positive," she said. "We're staying in the same resort but a different wing. They'll never know unless we want them to." We spent the rest of the day in quiet anticipation. I couldn't relax. My thoughts raced through every possible outcome, every emotion waiting to surface. It felt like I was about to step onto a stage where the final act of my life would unfold. Except this time, I wasn't a background character. I was the one the story had been waiting for. As the sun began to set, Iris did her makeup lightly, twisted her hair up, and slipped into a soft emerald silk jacket. I put on a simple navy dress, long and modest, but it made me feel composed, strong. In the elevator, as we headed down to the restaurant, Iris reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "Ready?" she whispered. I nodded, the hum of the elevator filling the silence between us. For the first time, I said quietly, "I think I am." "They're going to be shocked." Iris whispered, her voice calm but sharp with intent, "But don't lose your temper. Let them expose themselves." I nodded, though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We approached the poolside restaurant quietly, the soft glow of lanterns reflecting off the surface of the water. The air was warm, filled with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Iris tugged my sleeve gently and leaned close. "That's her," she whispered. My stomach dropped. "You mean she's the one Ethan's been seeing?" Iris gave a subtle nod. "I saw messages on Marjorie's phone weeks ago. An unknown number saved under a fake name. They called her the backup plan. I didn't say a word." My head was spinning, my palms damp with disbelief and anger. I turned my gaze back toward the table, and there he was. Ethan, sitting under the golden lights, smiling like he hadn't just erased me from his life. The woman beside him was young, elegant, and confident. Her manicured hand resting easily on his arm like it belonged there. I felt the world tilt. He leaned in close, whispered something, and she laughed, throwing her head back in a way I hadn't in months. I could almost hear the sound of my heart breaking, though my face stayed still, unreadable. Iris glanced at me. "Ready?" I clenched her hand, a cold smile curling on my lips. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Let's start the show." We moved carefully, positioning ourselves behind a row of tall palm trees, just a few feet away from their table. The music hummed in the background, couples toasted under fairy lights, and there they were. My husband, my mother-in-law, and their newest secret. Marjorie raised her glass, laughing freely. No trace of the sharp, controlling woman I'd come to dread. She looked proud, pleased, as if everything had gone exactly to plan. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Ethan looked relaxed, charming, like the man I once fell in love with. Except now, his warmth wasn't for me. It was for her. The stranger sitting too close. I barely noticed when Iris slipped something into my hand. A tiny phone with an earpiece attached. I planted a recorder under their table before they arrived. She whispered, "Listen, You need to hear what they say when they think you're not there. My fingers trembled as I fitted the earpiece into my ear. A second later, their voices crackled to life. She was never anything special. Marjorie's voice cut through, smooth but venomous. Did nothing for this family. If you're going to divorce her, at least make it count. Ethan's voice followed, lower, colder. I'll handle it. My lawyer says if we play this right, I can claim emotional neglect. No alimony, nothing. I might even get the house. The woman beside him giggled softly. Marjorie chuckled, the sound dripping with satisfaction. Compared to Clara, she said, this girl is gold next to rotting wood. Something in me snapped. I pulled the earpiece out, my lips pressed into a hard line. Iris looked at me, not asking, not pushing. Just waiting. I nodded once. It's time. We stepped out from behind the palm trees and walked straight toward the table. Each step echoed on the wooden deck like a countdown. Ethan looked up first. The color drained from his face. The woman froze mid-laugh, her hand slipping off his arm. Marjorie's wine glass hung motionless in the air. I stopped just a few feet away, my voice calm, steady, and far stronger than I felt. Good evening, I said. I hope everyone's enjoying dinner. Ethan's lips parted, his voice unsteady. See, Clara. I tilted my head slightly, smiling faintly. Don't stop on my account. You were just getting to the good part. The silence that followed was deafening. What are you doing here? Ethan stammered, his face pale, voice cracking. Before I could reply, Iris stepped forward. The entire table turned to stare as she walked confidently out from behind me. She moved with a grace that left everyone frozen in disbelief. Without saying a word, she pulled out the chair across from Marjorie and sat down. Marjorie's eyes widened. You're walking, she whispered, barely able to form the words. Iris's expression didn't waver. I've been walking and talking just fine since last year, she said, her voice soft but edged with ice. You always preferred me weak. You needed a burden to make yourself feel powerful, so I gave you one. Silence fell like a curtain. The woman sitting beside Ethan quickly pulled her hand from his, her face draining of color. Without another word, I pulled my phone from my purse, opened the voice recording, and pressed play. From the small speaker came Marjorie's voice. If you're divorcing her, make sure you reclaim the assets. Then Ethan's, cold and calculated. I'll say she's emotionally neglectful. My lawyer says if I play it right, I won't owe her a dime. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. Ethan shot up from his seat, his voice rising. What are you doing? Are you seriously trying to humiliate me in public? I met his eyes, unflinching. You've been humiliating me for over a year, Ethan. The only difference is, this time people can see it. Marjorie tried to speak, her tone suddenly desperate. Clara, wait, let us explain. No need. I interrupted sharply. I've heard enough, and I have the proof. I took a step back, my voice steady, my hands no longer shaking. I'll be speaking to my lawyer when I return home, and this divorce. I paused, meeting Marjorie's gaze. It won't be quiet. Ethan lunged forward, trying to grab my wrist. I raised my hand instinctively, stopping him cold. And you, I said evenly, my voice like steel, you'd better be ready to face the consequences of your lies. The young woman beside him stood up abruptly, clearly wanting to escape the chaos, but Iris's voice cut through the air. You might want to get a lawyer too, she said coolly, because I'm pretty sure you know exactly what you walked into. Ethan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides, shame and rage flickering across his face. You're ruining my life, he shouted. I let out a short, almost pitying laugh. No, Ethan, you did that yourself. I'm just the one pulling back the curtain. Then, without another glance, I turned and began walking away. Iris right beside me. The soft glow of lanterns behind us, the murmur of stunned voices, the sound of our heels on the deck. It all blurred into one sharp, liberating silence. Behind us, I heard Ethan's footsteps pounding against the stone path. "Clara, wait," he yelled, his voice breaking. "You can't do this. You're trying to destroy my life." I stopped, slowly turned around, looked directly into the eyes of the man who had once promised me forever. "No," I said quietly, "you destroyed your own life. I'm just showing people who you really are." His composure cracked completely. "If the company finds out," he stammered, "I could lose my job, everything." Beside me, Iris crossed her arms, her tone sharp and cold. "Then maybe you should have thought of that before taking your mistress on vacation and bad-mouthing your wife while she was home taking care of your helpless sister." Ethan turned to her, his mouth open in disbelief. I shook my head slowly. "I didn't come here to create a scene, Ethan. But you and your mother made sure I'd never find peace quietly. So now, you'll have to face everything you've tried to hide." Right then, the restaurant manager approached, flanked by 2 security guards, concern etched on his face. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" he asked politely, glancing between us and the table of died diners. I smiled faintly, holding Iris's hand. "It is now." One of the security officers stepped forward, his tone polite but firm. "Excuse me, sir. You're disturbing the other guests. We'll have to ask you to leave the dining area." Ethan opened his mouth as if to argue, but the quiet stares from nearby tables stopped him. His jaw tightened. Without another word, he let the guards escort him out, his once proud stride replaced by the slow walk of a man exposed. I watched him go, my heartbeat steady now. There was no satisfaction, just the hollow peace that comes after too much noise. Marjorie stayed seated, silent. Her hand clutched her wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. For years, she'd controlled every room she entered. But now she just stared down, her eyes vacant, as if she'd finally realized she'd lost the only power that ever mattered, her illusion of control. When I turned to leave, she didn't move. She just sat there, surrounded by the remnants of a family built on lies. Iris and I walked back to our room in silence. We didn't need to speak. The night air carried a quiet understanding between us. I knew things would get messy from here, legal battles, gossip, consequences, but underneath all of it, I felt something new. Relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't living under someone else's version of who I should be. The next morning, as the sun rose over the ocean, I made a call to North Carolina. An old college friend had once mentioned a law firm she trusted, and she connected me with an attorney named Marilyn Carter. From the moment she answered, her voice was calm, firm, and clear. It grounded me. I told her everything, from the cold, empty marriage to the betrayal in Hawaii. The voice recording the affair, the years of being treated like I didn't belong. I didn't leave out a single detail. When I finished, there was a pause. Then Marilyn said steadily, "You have strong evidence, Clara. You're entitled to a full divorce with infidelity claims, and given his employment status, we can pursue post-divorce financial support. If the other woman was involved during your marriage, we can also file a third-party interference suit." I took a breath and said, my voice firm for the first time in a long while, "I want to do everything legally possible. I want justice." Marilyn's tone softened just slightly. "Then we'll take care of the rest. You're not alone in this anymore." The next few weeks moved faster than I expected. Marilyn and her team worked quietly but efficiently, gathering hotel receipts, digital records, photos, and the audio recordings. Iris even helped retrieve text messages from her stepmother's old phone, proof of what they'd plotted behind my back. Everything was added neatly to the case file. A month later, I received the official notice. Ethan was ordered to divide all marital assets, and pay spousal support for the next 3 years. As for the other woman, Madeline Harper, the court accepted the claim for alienation of affection. She was held legally accountable for interfering in the marriage, with compensation set by the court. When I read the final verdict, I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. Justice, after all, doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like the soft closing of a door behind you, leaving the past where it belongs. When the first payment from the court settlement reached my account, I stared at the number glowing on the screen. But there was no thrill, no sense of conquest. What I felt was something far more powerful: closure. Not because of the money, but because, for the first time, no one else could measure my worth. Iris handed me a glass of non-alcoholic apple cider, her smile warm and bright. "Congratulations," she said softly. "No one can overlook you anymore." We clinked our glasses, and for the first time in a long while, my smile felt natural, steady as the breeze that rolled in from the ocean that day. 3 months have passed since the court ruling, and my life looks nothing like it once did. The small apartment I'd shared with Ethan has been replaced by a light-filled top-floor unit overlooking Pullen Park in downtown Raleigh. It feels symbolic, starting over close to my old college, as if I'd hit reset, only this time with a heart that no longer flinched at the past. I returned to the world of finance, but on my own terms. I'm an independent consultant now. I choose my projects, work with clients I respect, and, most importantly, I have the freedom to say no to anyone who treats me as less than I am. No more manipulation disguised as affection. No more cold silences passed off as strength. No more shrinking myself to make others comfortable. Iris and I still talk every week. After everything, we're not just former sisters. In law, we're survivors. 2 women who refused to stay broken. She moved in with a friend in Asheville and finally started the graphic design course she'd dreamed about for years. "You were the first person who believed in me enough for me to live honestly," she told me one night over video call. I smiled. "You did that yourself," I said. "I just reminded you it was possible." Her courage lit a fire in me too. One quiet weekend afternoon, while I was watering the herbs on my balcony, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I froze. Ethan and Marjorie stood there. They looked nothing like the people I remembered, pale, tired, and worn down by life. The arrogance was gone. Ethan's voice was thin when he finally spoke. "Clara, I know this is unexpected, but could you help us?" I said nothing. He swallowed hard. "I lost my job. After the lawsuit, the firm let me go. Madeline left when she realized I had nothing. My mom's out of money. Dad cut her off. It's just us now." I turned my gaze toward Marjorie. Her head was bowed, her hands clasped tightly. "Clara," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I was wrong, so wrong, but I have no one else. I just hoped you could find it in your heart to help." For a moment, the only sound was the rustling of leaves outside. I tilted my head slightly, keeping my tone calm. "Funny," I said. "I once begged you both for a little kindness, and now it's you asking me." Ethan's eyes pleaded. "I know you hate me," he said quickly, "but I've learned my lesson. Please, just a little help." I took a deep breath. "I don't hate you, Ethan," I said quietly. "I just regret wasting so much time thinking you were worth saving." Marjorie's eyes filled with tears. "You can't be this heartless." I gave a soft smile. "I'm not heartless. I've just learned boundaries, and mine is simple. I don't let people who once disrespected or betrayed me back into my life." Before either of them could respond, I closed the door gently. Outside, the wind stirred. I walked to the balcony, opened the small jar of sea salt I'd prepared earlier, and sprinkled it along the doorway. My own little ritual. Not superstition, but symbolism. That handful of salt was a quiet promise. The past no longer had a key to my present. Inside, the apartment glowed with the amber light of sunset. I sank onto the sofa, hugging the soft knitted pillow Iris had given me, and watched the sky fade into gold. For the first time in years, my heart felt light, at peace. Not every ending is pretty, but some endings are necessary. And for me, this wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of silence, the beginning of a life I chose for myself. Because strength isn't always about holding on, it's knowing when to let go. I was betrayed, dismissed, and left behind. But those very things taught me how to rediscover my worth. Life doesn't end when someone walks away from you. It truly begins the moment you decide to walk forward for yourself. And if anyone reading this ever finds themselves standing where I once stood, I hope you have the courage to choose your own happiness.